insanity that I agreed to do this. My my sister Naomi Baya, who's right here on the Zoom, I can see her. She called me last week, and I happened to have been in America. I was actually in a hospital room. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And she asked me. She said about this holy group of women, that meet to say nishmas, and it was like so touching to me because nishmas, nishmas is the neshama, and I was really thinking about the neshama right then. I'll tell you why. So like I said, in a moment of temporary insanity, I agreed, and here I am, and I'm very, very grateful to be here. And I really want to share with you something very personal. So I was in the hospital because my father was in the hospital, and like Naomi said, I live here in Eretz Yisrael. It was not simple at all. To get to America, the skies are closed and this and that, but whatever it was, Israelis know how to, pull their protexias here and there. And I was able to leave the country, and I was able to be with my father for a very precious 5 or 6 days. So my father was in the hospital because he had some urinary tract infection, and it turned into whatever, a few various things. Baruch Hashem, the end of the story is that he left yesterday, and he went to my brother's house in Passaic, and we got a clip of him there. He seems to be happy and settled there, Baruch Hashem. So, but my father suffers from Alzheimer's, a severe case of Alzheimer's, and I guess any person with a parent in that kind of situation, anyone who has had a parent in that situation, or anyone who has a good imagination, can imagine that it's very, very painful, to see your parent like that. I can only talk about my own personal experience. And, for me, for my family, for my brothers and sisters, and for my father's hundreds of students, it feels particularly painful because he played such a central role in our lives. He was like so much he was a pillar of our lives in many ways. He was like an oracle. He was very wise. He always knew everything. He always knew how to say exactly what you needed to hear. He understood us on a deeper level. Like I think about the fact that as a teenager, most teenagers walk around with the feeling that no one in the world understands them. And I always felt my father understood me, like even when I was a teenager, that I felt like he understood me when I was an adult is I think less dramatic than the fact that as a teenager, I felt he understood me. And to see him in this situation, so compromised, it's tragic. It's just so sad. It's just so sad, these dependent, and it's humiliating. And, and it was interesting to me, like, the nurses in the hospital. And I have to say, I have such a new appreciation for nurses, for nursing in general, and for the nurses specifically in the hospital. The great majority of them were just like incredibly, incredibly gentle and nice. It was a miracle that we were even able to be there with him. It was the whole situation, how we were able to get permission to be in the hospital with him. But I was observing the nurses 24 hours a day, and most of them were just incredibly nice. But like they really didn't even have, they didn't really have the tools to understand anything about, like, my father or his lifestyle, the way he lived. They would call, like, I remember one nurse kept on saying, "Come on, buddy, here, roll over, buddy." Or she'd call him, she'd say, "Come on, little guy." And I was like, do you know who you're talking to? Like, this is so absurd, like to talk to and she was just trying to be nice. In fact, one nurse's aide even yelled at him at one point because like his arm flailed out, and she's like, "Stop hitting," whatever. And I came running over, I was like at the side of the room, and I was like so appalled that, like, how could they talk to my father? But of course they were doing their best. And at one point I remember I even shared with one of the nurses, like, my father was an intellectual. He was, I couldn't really describe what a Talmud Chacham he was and the Sfarim he wrote. So she said to me, "Yeah, I know what you mean, because my father was a chemist, and he used to write, I remember he spent a lot of time like writing up these chemistry books or whatever it was." And I sort of felt like this is like such a huge gap between the way I was experiencing what my father was and, But the end of the story, like I said, is Baruch Hashem, my father is right now safe. He's out of the hospital. And the other end of the story is that it was really in a certain way, those 5 or 6 days with my father in the hospital were some of the most beautiful days of my life. I was there over Shabbos with him. And it's like funny because there were no trappings of Shabbos. I stayed in the room 24 hours because we were afraid to go out all the time, because we were afraid the hospital would notice that we were, they gave us permission, but we didn't want to, flaunt the fact that we were still in the hospital. And, so there were no trappings of Shabbos, and really it was like sort of just, we had to make Shabbos. And, I said, we said Kiddush, and I sang to my father something. I would never inflict my singing on anybody in the world, except for maybe my babies. I remember one of my brothers said to me when I was, when we were still living, he used to say to me, he said, Miriam, you don't have to worry about Kolisha. You could sing in front of any man you want. Your voice is so awful. It's just fine. So, I sat next to my father and I sang the songs with him. And it was like literally we felt the feeling of Shabbos in the room. And there were a number of times that he just looked at me and he smiled at me. It was such a beautiful, beautiful smile. And I heard this from my other brothers and sisters who were also in the hospital with him at different times and spent a tremendous amount of time with him. One of my siblings said I would have traveled from the end of the world just to get that smile. It was such a beautiful, beautiful, just a beautiful, beautiful smile. But the question that like sort of comes up when you see somebody in such a compromised state is like, what is the purpose of this kind of life? And one of the doctors, somebody who had to perform some sort, a urologist, whatever, he sort of said something like that. We were talking about whether to do a certain procedure. And he said, he's 90 years old. He has Alzheimer's. I mean, he didn't finish the sentence, but basically what he was saying is like who really cares? Like, let's just let things go. His life isn't worth that much. That was like sort of the subtext, or the subtext I heard. Maybe that's, and of course, somebody who's in a situation where they have to make decisions, end of life decisions, has to ask a posek and find out what the halacha is. And what I'm saying right now is just an insight, has nothing to do with what a person should or shouldn't do. But even in our own family, we sort of struggled with this idea, like how valuable, maybe it's better for a person to just, and maybe you shouldn't do so much to keep the person alive, because how much is life worth in this kind of situation? And as we discussed it, we suddenly remembered a class that my father had given many years ago. And he'd said it over to us a number of times in many different variations. And it was just like an amazing thing to rediscover this idea, because it was sort of like he had given us the chizuk we needed way, way, way before any of us dreamed. I remember my father's father had Alzheimer's, and we used to like sometimes discuss, but it was so clear to us that it wouldn't happen to my own father, because of course it wouldn't happen. He was never going to get old bichlal, and he certainly wouldn't be in this situation. But my father really gave us this chizuk years before. And he told us over a chabura that he used to give to his bachrim, to the boys in the yeshiva. He often did this. He would start off a study session with them by asking them a question, and then, bring that into a discussion. So he once started off with the question. He said, what would happen if a note would fall down from heaven saying that for a week you're absolved of keeping the Torah? You don't have to keep any of the Torah and mitzvos, and there won't be any negative ramifications from. You don't have to worry about like it leaving a blemish on your soul. You could do whatever you want for a week. So I remember him once telling this over. He said, like the boys, the yeshiva guys were like sort of laughing abashedly, and they're like, Rebbe, you don't want to know what we would do if we got a week off from keeping the Torah. Like, we're not going to share with you the things we would do if we weren't like burdened by mitzvahs. And my father said to the boys, but I'll tell you what I would do. He said, I would go around the old age homes and the hospitals, and I would pull the plugs on the patients that are not conscious, or that are suffering, or that are in pain, because it's so awful. They're a lot of times they're in a lot of discomfort or pain, and they don't know what's going on anyway. So what's the purpose of their life? So that's what I would do. So my father said to the boys, I would choose to relieve them of their suffering. And then he went on and he said to the boys, but you know what? A note did not come down from Shemayim and say that we're absolved of the Torah. We have to keep the Torah. And what does it mean that we have to keep the Torah? It means that our job is to align ourselves with what the Torah wants from us, not to try and align the Torah to how we view it. Like, we could say, what's the point of life? But if the Torah tells us that there is a point of life, then we have to try and align our way of thinking, try and understand what is the Torah telling us here. And the truth of the matter is that pulling the plug would fall under lo tirtzach, would fall under do not murder. And the Gemara, when it talks about this idea of deciding whose life comes before another's life, the Gemara uses the term, is your blood redder than his? So you could imagine a discussion group, like an ethics committee that's trying to decide if you have a limited amount of machines or something like that. So who should it go to? So then they'd say, why do you think that this old man's blood is less red than your blood? And the answer would be, I'll tell you why, for a lot of reasons, because I'm younger, because my mind is clear, because I could be creative, because I can think, because I can do things. It seems very clear to us that some people's blood is redder than other people. Somebody who's completely unconscious, it seems clear to us that their blood is less red than somebody who is conscious and there and is not a zombie or a vegetable or whatever word you would use. And the Gemara says no. The Gemara says your blood is not any redder than their blood. In other words, the decision of when to keep a person alive is not based on their intellectual capacities. And my father explained in one of those chaburas, if he would sometimes take it into different directions, but I remember one where he would talk about the bracha that we say Asher Yatzar after going to the bathroom, and it finishes off Rofeichol Basar Umafli La'asos. Hashem is the healer of all flesh, and he's Mafli La'asot. He does wondrous things. And he said, what is the wondrous thing? It's the next part of the davening, right after the bracha that we say after the bathroom, is the bracha Elokai Neshama Shenatata Bi. Elokai, the soul that you placed in me. What's the pella that Hashem does? What's the wondrous thing that Hashem does? Is that he takes this body that's completely physical. We're called Adam because we were created from the Adamah, from the earth. And this clod of earth, he puts in this clod of earth a neshama. And the Torah tells us that the Vayipach Bapo Nishmas Chaim, what is this neshama? Chelek Elokam Imal, a piece of Hashem he puts inside us. And he says, what a pella that is. That this body, this completely physical being has a neshama within him. That is a pella. That this human being that's not that different than a sophisticated chimpanzee has a neshama and has a spark of Hashem. That is that's the wonder. And it's something that a lot of people today have lost their ability to fathom. I remember once hearing or reading that Dennis Prager has this question that he asks groups of high school students, like, what would you do if your dog was drowning and a human being that you don't know, a person was drowning, who would you save? And then he has this very interesting points that he brings out, but the students that would say that they would save a human being. So then he sort of tries to up the ante, and he says to them, what would you do if the dog was a seeing eye dog, was very talented and could help human beings, and the human being was, very, very limited intellectually, or, didn't have much of a future. And the students that would insist, I would still save the person. So the other students would say, oh, that's just like a preference for a species. You just have a preference for the human species. As if that's a problem, that you think human beings are intrinsically superior to other animals. And the answer is, and from a Torah perspective, yes, it's a preference of species. The human being has a certain sanctity of life that no other living thing has, even though their life is also valuable. You don't want to kill a plant or an animal unnecessarily, but a human being. And the Medrash says on the words nishmas, it says kol neshama tahalolka. It says the words kol neshama tahalolka, and the Medrash says not kol neshama tahalolka. Read it kol neshima. Neshima means every breath. Kol neshima uneshima tahalolka. Every breath that a human being takes is a praise of Hashem. It's a celebration of the wondrous God that created this wondrous being that has a body, like I said, like a sophisticated chimpanzee, and at the same time has a spark of Hashem inside him. And in a hospital, that's where you really remember how completely physical we are. There's so much physicality in taking care of a person who can't take care of themselves. And the kol neshima, every breath that a human being takes, he's a celebration of this wondrous being. So in a certain way, it was almost as if my father didn't really explain. Like he just said, life is precious. Why is life precious? Because Hashem says it's precious, and we have to align ourselves with that understanding that life is precious. But I want to take it to another level, and that is that I sort of feel in a certain way in this kind of situation, when a person is so compromised and so diminished in their capacities, it's almost that you can understand the Tahalol Ka, the praise of Hashem that exists from their essence on an even deeper level. And I want to connect that to the fact that when Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu that you should go and tell Paro, tell Paro to take the Jewish people out and to let the Jewish people out. When you go and tell the Jewish people that I'm going to take them out of Mitzrayim, Moshe didn't want to go. And he said to Hashem that I'm kaved lashon, or kaved peh. I have and we usually translate it to children. It's like he has a stutter, he didn't speak well, he had a speech impediment. And the Maharal explains that really, that wasn't what it was. When he said kaved lashon, kaved means heavy. My mouth is heavy. What is that heaviness? So speech is physical. Speech is the physical way that we translate something spiritual. You have an idea, like right now, I have a thought, I have a feeling, I have an idea, and I'm transferring it to you through my speech. What is speech on a literal level? It's physical, right? There's the voice wave, the sound waves, and my lips are moving, and there's however speech comes out of your mouth. I don't really know, but it's all physical. You need the physical manifestation for the idea to get through to the world. And Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to Hashem, look, I just had this vision, and on a certain level, I saw you. It was the most incredible vision. How in heaven's name am I, a physical being, supposed to give over the idea of God to human being? How am I supposed to do it? My mouth is heavy, my physicality is heavy. There's no way I can give this over. I think we often have that feeling when we have to say something very, very deep. I remember I used to say to my babies when I give them a kiss, or I love you so much, I'm going to eat you up. Right? I didn't mean literally I was going to eat them up, but what did I mean? I meant I cannot express the love that I feel for you in words. I just feel it so strongly. I'm trying to figure out how to say that over. So that's what Moshe said to Hashem. He said, how can I possibly give over this spiritual idea that you exist and that you're going to save us through my mouth? And Hashem said, okay, I understand. That's a good point. I'm going to come with you and I'm going to help you. And it's only if I'm going to help you that you'll be able to do it. So in a certain way, our physicality and our abilities, because on the one hand, our speech and our ability to speak is like the most powerful aspect of us as human beings. We're called a medaber. That's what gives us our essence as human beings. But in a certain way, it's our ability and our knowledge and the things that we do to express ourselves that weigh us down. Because even the most brilliant person is nothing next to Hashem. And even the most brilliant Talmud Chacham, and even the most brilliant Torah that a person might know. The mashal that's often used is like a candle next to the sun. So if you're in a dark room and there's candle, that lights up the whole room. And that's here in Galus, we're in exile, and any Torah that we hear lights our life up. But if you take that candle and you hold it up next to the sun, it's meaningless. It has no purpose. And my father used to say, I don't know who he quoted, maybe it was Rav Hutner, but he used to say that the last perek in Sefer Tehillim, you just said some Tehillim, we just said some Tehillim together. When you get to the last perek doesn't, it's not words. It really talks about the instruments that are used to praise Hashem. Halu b'seika shofar, halu b'nevel v'chinor. And the very, very last word of the Tehillim, of the Sefer Tehillim, is Kol Neshama Talelka. And he said that the reason that the last parak of Tehillim, after 150 chapters, 149 chapters that talk about how David HaMelech expressed, or whoever wrote the different Tehillim, how they expressed their feelings for Hashem in words, the last one says no words, just instruments, because there's a certain level where you can't really put into words this spiritual experience. Kol Neshama Talelka. At the end, it's the neshama itself that's going to praise Hashem. It's the quietness of the neshama that has no ability to really express itself because it's so lofty and so unconnected to the physical world. So in a certain way, there's a closeness that a neshama can get to Hashem, dafka, when it's not capable and when it's not articulate and when it can't, put into words. And I sort of felt this on a deep level because, with all the closeness in our relationship between my parents and us children, we were not like a mushy kind of family. And I don't think my parents ever said very often that I love you. Like nowadays, people say those words all the time. I sometimes think like, whatever, they talk to anybody, they say, I love you. And I don't remember that they used to say that. Maybe they did sometimes say it, but I could tell you one thing, that I never for 1 second doubted the fact that my parents loved me so so intensely. I always had the feeling that if I needed my parents, they would fly to the ends of the earth for me. They managed to give over this feeling of love in a way without words. And so, but here I am in the hospital, and uh, um, and my father's in this state, and there's really no language, right? You can't talk, you can't discuss. I can't ask my father questions and hear his answers and argue with him like I used to do and say, Daddy, I don't know, that doesn't make sense, what do you think? And he would respond. There's nothing left. And I found that the only language for medium for connection was touch, because words didn't work. And I stroked my father's hands, I kissed him, and I remember feeling that when he did open his eyes and give me that beautiful smile, it was like there was such a vulnerability, such a sweetness, and such a purity. It was almost like looking into the purity of a child's face. And it was almost like being able to tap into that voice of Kol Neshama Tahalal, that voice that goes beyond the physical. So in a certain way, the sadness that I felt in the hospital, I felt like it was a paradox, because the sadness on the one hand was an aspect of the godless ha'adam, the greatness of man. And my father was so great, and he was so compromised that the sadness was a result of his greatness. And on the other hand, the simcha also came from his greatness, because his greatness was not just from all that he was able to do and teach and write and speak. His greatness was from that inner tiny, inner essence, that inner core, the idea that he was a Tselem Elokim, that Hashem gave him Chelik Elokam Imal, as long as he's here in this world. My father actually said this shir on the words in Koheles, where it says it's better a live dog than a dead lion. It's a very interesting pasuk in Koheles, but basically it says, like, the lion is like the king of the jungle, and the dog is like nothing. But if he has life, he's everything. So the idea of just being alive, that the essence of life is really the godless Adam, is the greatness of a person. And I feel like I can't 3 days before Purim, or 4 days, I can't just drop off here without Purim, because I think this is very, very connected to Purim. So I'll just finish up with this one idea, that the simcha of Purim, I think, is the same kind of thing. A Jew is supposed to be happy. So we're marbim b'simcha, we're happier in Adar. But notice that in Halacha, when it talks about Chodesh Av, it says mimatim b'simcha. It doesn't say be sad in Chodesh Av. It says diminish a little bit the simcha. Like, in other words, your status quo is happy. In Adar, you should be very happy. In Av, you should sort of like dampen down the simcha, but don't ever, ever, ever turn away. Don't ever, ever destroy the simcha. The simcha is the baseline. You have to be happy. And where does that come from? And I think it comes from what we were just talking about now, this basic understanding that life has meaning and purpose beyond what we can see with our eyes. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that says, Tnu shacher le'oved, give wine to the oved. Oved is spelled Aleph Vav Beis Dalid, right? Oved, from the word to be lost, like to lose something, Hashavas Aveda. And it goes on and it says, V'yayin lamari nefesh. So Rav Moshe Shapiro explains that what's the oved? The oved is the fatalist. The fatalist is the person who doesn't believe there's any purpose in life. And wine for him is an escape. You drink wine because life is just unbearable. You see sickness, you see suffering, you see people see things you don't understand. And you drink wine because, like, okay, whatever, let me just get out of this world for a little bit and pretend it doesn't exist. Let me just get myself drunk. And it's not a positive thing, it's a horrible thing. But you give wine to that fatalist, that person that feels like life is absolutely without purpose. But the yayin lamari nefesh uses a different word for wine for the end of the pasuk. The mari nefesh are the people whose souls are in pain. Mari nefesh, the people who are suffering. They're bitter, they're sad, there's pain, there's suffering. They sort of feel like life is just so hard. Life is just weighing down on them. So they drink yayin, right? The person who's oved, the fatalist, he drinks, I think it's pronounced shacher, right? The certain kind of wine for the fatalist. But the one who's marei nefesh, the person who's feeling weighed down by life, he drinks yayin. And what's yayin? Yayin, we know, has the same gematria as the word sod, which is secret. So when a Jew drinks on Purim, now there's all kinds of, I don't know if it's politically correct to even mention that people drink on Purim, but if they do, or if they once did, right? So the kind of drinking on Purim, what was the drinking on Purim? It was to reveal the secret. We don't drink on Purim to forget anything. We're not trying to forget anything. We're trying to get to a deeper level of awareness. We want to remember. What do we want to remember? We want to remember that all this, this world that we're living in is really it's sheker. It's not the true thing. It's a story of somebody who, after they died, appeared to someone in a dream, and they said to him, it says it in the Gemara. It says, "Tell me what's the world like in the world to come?" And he says, "I can't really tell you what the world to come is. I can just tell you it's an upside down world." An upside down world, which means the people who you think are like so wonderful here in this world might not be so wonderful in the world to come. And the people who are like nothing in this world, they might be the highest ones in the world to come. So the truth of Purim is that it's a v'nahapachu. All the things that we thought were so negative and so horrible. What's the point? This urologist, what's the point of his life? He's 90 years old, he has Alzheimer's. And the sod, the yayin that lets us reveal that sod, is that what's the point of his life? The point of his life is kol neshama tahaloka. And the point of his life is that he's here in this world, and he is a tzelem Elokim. And Hashem put him here, and he's doing his purpose. He's living his life. And he's doing what Hashem wants from us. And Naomi mentioned that I wrote this book about gender, so I almost can't ever talk about anything without mentioning gender. So I just want to say that I think that women have a special connection to the simcha. It says v'tischak yom acharon, because the woman as a physical metaphor, right? Not every woman has had children or will have children or whatever, but as a physical metaphor, the feminine, the idea of a baby inside the mother is the idea that a woman represents the concept of living on two levels at the same time. You're a regular person, and yet inside you something is growing and developing and moving forward. So in other words, that the woman represents the idea of living with these two truths. The truth of what you see, it's painful, it's sad, it's tragic, and at the same time to be aware of a truth on the inside, and that truth is a truth of joy, that there's growth and there's development and there's closeness to Hashem, even when it's not necessarily obvious to the eye. Thank you very much.
Wow, Miriam, that was unbelievable. Thank you for having a moment of insanity to speak to us. That was so amazing. It was like such deep, unbelievable, like such a different way of understanding and looking at the value of life, and how you experienced your father's neshama at that moment, when you were with him for those 5 days, and understood it as being something so much deeper than what we see from the outside. It's unbelievable. It's so unbelievably true. It's amazing. Yeah. So amazing. It's amazing who we really are, what our neshamas really are. It's really unbelievable. Wow. So I hope you have another moment of insanity in the future. Speak to us again, because this was really unbelievable. Mamish unbelievable. And your father should have a refuah shlema, and he should,
Amen.
You should all just continue to be able to enjoy every part of him and every moment of him. And B'ezras Hashem, should only see good for all of Am Yisrael.
Amen.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I just love it so much. Thank you so much. Really, it's amazing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.